We're back for part two. It's not really part two. It's where it all started in terms of this time around. So it probably was about a year, actually. It was a long time. I had what they found to be a small growing tumor at the same site as I did the last two times. They had said that it was not aggressive and that it was slow growing, so we had choices to make. And they had me talk to the medical oncologist about the possibility of doing chemotherapy or doing immunotherapy to see what we could do with this, rather than necessarily going to surgery right away this time. There seemed to be a little bit of, I would say, they were not too anxious to do the surgery this time. And I realize now, because it was such an extensive surgery and because it carried such high risks with it. So the decision was ultimately made because after I spoke to the medical oncologist a couple of times, we were going to start, but I asked him what the odds were of it working, and he said between 10 and 15%. I didn't like the odds. So it seemed to me it was not necessarily the way to go. When I spoke to the surgical oncologist, I got the feeling from her that she really preferred not to do the surgery, and it didn't feel to me as if she was encouraging me to go that route. So I took too long to make a decision about it. What she said was it paid to do the chemo, in case it did help along the way. And she said, at least you'll be doing something. But again, as I say, I just didn't like the odds. It didn't seem to me to be on my side. So finally, ultimately, the decision was made to do the surgery, and I was given a choice of two dates, and I chose the 18th of April, which, I can face anything in my life as long as it's out there in the future. I don't know if you'll like that, but I'm brave when it's something that's not immediate, but life has a funny way of moving things along. And all of a sudden the time came for the surgery. David came in once again, and I'm so grateful for it, because it would be really hard for me to go through this without him. He is a wonderful voice of reason. He is very logical. He is very good to be with when you're going through a difficult time like this. So David, if you're watching this, which you're probably not, I'm really grateful that you were here for me. So he came in that day, and we spent a little time together in the evening, and we wound up, I fell asleep for a very little while. I was tired because I had loads of things to do to get ready for the surgery. Once again, and this is something I do, I don't know if anybody else does this. Every time I've had to have surgery, and this is the third time, in my mind, I tend to think that I'm going in, 2 weeks from now, I'll be fine. I'll go back to my life and everything will be hunky-dory. It's not how it works, apparently. The world doesn't work like that. So I went in for the surgery, not too terribly frightened, feeling very confident in my team. I think they're wonderful. And I really felt as if I had them on my side and that it was going to make a difference in the outcome. So I got there in the middle of the night, and that's typically the way it goes. And they had told me ahead of time that this surgery would very likely run about anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. So apparently it ran about 9.5 hours. I got there in the middle of the night. They have a very smooth system of getting people in. And it always makes me very sad about how many people are in that waiting room up on the 6th floor where the ORs are. And they just took me through the process. And they had the doctors come in. Ooh, ouch, I still have a sore that I developed, I don't know, in the hospital or before, I think it was before I got to rehab, but my butt hurts. So that's one of the things I have to deal with as it hopefully resolves itself. But for right now, it's painful. I think I need a pillow to sit on. I don't know. So let me find a place for myself where hopefully I'm not leaning right on it. But I am. So if I wince every now and then, ignore me. So I got there. It was before 5 o'clock in the morning. I would say 4:30-ish. We went upstairs and they went through the process of going through the whole signing in part of it. They took me to an area, the waiting area for the surgical process to begin. I saw the doctors. Once again, my plastic surgeon, I adore him. He is very, very serious. He is very cautious. He really cares about the outcome. And I think I fell in love with him as a physician the very first time I saw him. Because the first time I went back in 2018, I had been misdiagnosed for about 6 months. And unfortunately, my sarcoma, which was an undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma, to the best of my recollection, that had grown tremendously over a period of 6 months when I kept going back to my primary care physician, who was new to me at the time, and he kept telling me it was a lipoma and not to worry about it. He said they're uncomfortable and they do grow large sometimes, and he said we don't really do anything about it unless it bothers you, and then we can have the surgery. So he was going to recommend an orthopedist for me, and that was where it was. But by the time I had seen him the 3rd time and I was getting the same message from him, he did at that point order an MRI. I got that done, and unfortunately, when I read the report, it said it was suggestive of a sarcoma, and I was in a state of shock. So I was searching at that point for my own physicians because I was not going to take a recommendation from him. And I found I found Dr. Crago, who is my sarcoma specialist and my surgical oncologist. So she referred me to the plastic surgeon. They were going to be doing the first surgery together, and in fact, they've done each one together. So Dr. Matros, who is the plastic surgeon, when I told him my story, and he and his nurse were standing there the first time, and he truly looked sad, and you could see that he really felt for me. At the end of that visit, he just put his arms around me and he said, "I'm so sorry." And at that point I said, this is a human being who happens to be a surgeon, who happens to do all this wonderful work, but he cares. And that somebody told me many, many years ago in my own profession of being a realtor, that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So that is very, very true. So to get back to Dr. Matros, when he came to see me on the morning of the surgery, he said to me, he said, "Don't worry, I'll do the right thing by you." And I said, "I know that. I absolutely trust you. So I trusted both of them going in. They both came to see me. You know, in the way that my surgical oncologist explains things to me, it was like, I mean, I know they have to tell you all the things that can go wrong, but she said that I could have a heart attack, I could have a stroke, I could have all these wretched things happen to me. And at one point, because I do have this crazy sense of humor, I said, but if I do make it through the surgery, then what can I expect? So I went into it feeling pretty okay. It's magical to me how quickly they get you ready for this surgery. I remember absolutely nothing within moments of being in the OR itself and having all these people around telling me that they were going to do what they needed to do for their portion of the surgery. The next thing I knew, it was night. The surgery began, I believe, at 8 something in the morning, and I believe it ended at 5 something in the evening. And they had me in the recovery room. Apparently I was in the recovery room for quite some time, and I really had a quite terrible experience in the recovery room, and I would not want this to happen to anybody. They have different parts of the recovery room, and I was in, I don't remember now if they called it the quad. Wherever it was, they could have anywhere from 1 to 4 beds to the best of my knowledge. So if I didn't get this exactly right, forgive me, but I believe that's the way it was. And the bed was directly behind the nurse's station. So I got to hear a lot. In the process of waking up, the nurse I had for the earlier part of it before she left, and the new staff came on for the next leg of it. The first one was very solicitous and kept asking me how I was feeling and to tell her anything that was going on and anything that I felt that was different. So when she introduced me to her replacement for the next part of it, I did the same thing. I started to tell her all the things, but she was a very, very different person than the one I had earlier. And everything I said and every question I had, she would say to me, "Why do you say that?" And she was challenging everything I said. I was just trying to figure out where I was and trying to navigate this very, very difficult part of my early recovery. So again, I was there for many hours, and I do know that I was fearful at one point. It was getting very frightening for me because, as I say, she and I just did not click. And I finally said to her, I never used to talk back. I never was that much of an advocate for myself, but I've changed over the years. I think as you grow older, there's less to lose. You just know that you need to be there for yourself because who knows who else will be. So at one point, I overheard a bunch of them talking, and I'm not going to get too far into it, but they were making fun of me, and they were, one of them was saying that I was crazy, and they were talking about one of the things apparently when I first came in, and they were talking to me, the first, I don't know if it was the first nurse or one of the first people to talk to me before the surgery. And they ask a load of questions, you know, they're getting your medical history and all of that. And I was really very calm and relaxed at that point. And I remember one of the questions that they ask is, are you pregnant? Well, at my age, I think that's a hilarious question. So I said what I always say when somebody asks me that. And I said to her, if I am, it's time for another world celebration. So when they were talking and laughing about me, one of them mentioned that and said, she's crazy. And they were making fun of lots of different things that happened. I became very, very fearful at that point, and I was awake most of the time, and I was frightened, and I didn't trust them. So it got to the point, before they took me upstairs, before a room was ready for me, on the surgical floor for my plastic surgeon, which happened to be the top floor. They refer to it as the penthouse. I just didn't trust anything they did or said, and they had talked about writing me up, writing a report, and putting down all the things that they said made me crazy. One of the things they mentioned was the fact that I have a pocket in my throat. It's not called a pocket. I don't remember the medical term for it, because it's something I've had since I was a little girl. When I was a little girl, I had taken antibiotics that I was allergic to. And at the time I was a little girl. So what my mother did was she emptied it was a gel cap. She emptied it into a spoon, put sugar in it, gave it to me. My throat swelled to the point that I couldn't swallow soup. I was really, really bad for days. Fortunately for me, my mother had called the doctor and he told her not to give me any more of that medication. And I don't think I'd be here to tell the story if I had more. But apparently it created this pocket in my throat, because whatever it did that made my throat swell, it did some damage. It's very hard for me to swallow big pills. I can swallow small pills, but I cannot swallow the big ones, and they sometimes get stuck in the pocket. So to make a long story short, I had mentioned the pocket, and they were making fun of that. And they said that was another thing that obviously showed that I was crazy, because that doesn't exist. Sometime during the process of them writing this report, or planning on writing this report, somebody looked it up and found out that it does in fact exist. So there I was, vindicated on some level, but I just couldn't take it anymore. And I finally said to them, though they wanted to give me some kind of a medication, I felt like it was going to be some kind of a psychotropic drug or something like that. And I was not having any of it. And they did say at one point that they would disguise it as something else if need be. And I was terrified at that point. So I wound up saying out loud, I'm not taking anything from you. When they heard that, one of them went, oh my God. And they realized that I heard everything that they said. So it made the rest of my stay in the recovery room a nightmare. And as I say, I trusted nothing. Fortunately for me, before it was time for me to go upstairs, they called David upstairs. I think at that point they just wanted to get rid of me, and they knew that they had some things to deal with, to come up with some kind of a story, which is what ultimately I heard them say. And they said that they were all going to tell the same story. So David came up and they were getting ready to take me upstairs to, this is going to wind up being a crazy long video. So we were going up to the 19th floor from the 6th floor. And they told David he would have to go in a separate elevator. And I said, no way. I said, I'm not getting on an elevator with you people if David's not on the same elevator as I am. Now, at that point, I probably did sound like I was crazy because I was terrified of them. So they wound up allowing David to go with me, and we got up to the floor. When we got off the elevator, the nurses from that floor came to greet me, and one of them was making small talk. Well, I was scared at that point, and I was, as I say, probably acting a little crazy at that stage of it. And I said to her, "Stop trying to distract me. Where am I?" Because at that point, I thought they were taking me to some kind of a psych floor or something. I didn't know where I was, and I just was so frightened. When David and I had a chance to talk about it later, he said, "Mom, we were in the most beautiful place in the world." It was, they referred to it as the penthouse. It was beautiful. I'm going to show you some photos that David took of the space. It was wonderful, and David kept saying to me, "I kept wanting you to stop doing what you were doing because I didn't want them to kick us off this beautiful floor with all of this wonderful care." Once they got me into a room and I got past my terror and I realized that David was going to be staying with me, he actually slept with me. It was like a suite. The room was huge. It had a sofa, it had a recliner chair, it had other chairs. It was a wonderful, wonderful space, and I felt safe at last. So the first night that I was there in early morning hours, it was a little bit dodgy. But by the second day, I realized that I was in a wonderful place and on a wonderful floor, and the care that I got was extraordinary. The rest of my stay at the hospital was wonderful, and I can only commend everybody who was there for me, and the experience turned out to be wonderful. What was difficult about it for me, and it was the fact that I was not able, because of the location of the surgery and the graft, and the fact that the doctor had said he was in essence rewiring me, and he needed to make sure that I wasn't going to crimp anything, and it was a difficult recuperation anyway, and as I say, it was high risk. So they wanted to make sure after all that work that it worked. So I could only be between 30-degree angle and a 45-degree angle to the best of my knowledge. But I know I couldn't be higher than a 45-degree angle. So it was very, very difficult. And I thought that I would be in bed for about 3 days because that's what he did after my first surgery. But unfortunately for me, it was a week before they let me get off the bed at all. I had the catheter in for days. I really, really needed to take it day by day till I got to the point where I started to feel as if there was some kind of healing going on. When they finally did let me out of the bed, I still wasn't able to sit. I was able to lie down, I was able to roll on my side, roll off the bed, and I could sit for 30 seconds at first. You can't do anything in 30 seconds, and I had to be pushing myself off the bed to get up. It was hard. The very first time, and I do have a photo of them doing it with me, physical therapy came in and got me off the bed and had me standing up. They told me that their expectation at that moment in time was that I would get up, be very lightheaded, and they would put me right back into bed. But that was not the case. I was actually able to walk from my bed to the window and back, and they were very, very impressed with what I was able to accomplish. They insisted on taking a couple of pictures of it so that David could see it, and they knew that he would be really pleased To make a long story short about the rest of my stay in the hospital was that they were very, very careful about how they moved ahead. By the time I left the hospital, I believe at that point, I was able to sit for 2 minutes. And I was going off to rehab. I was afraid to go to rehab because of my really terrible experience at the second one I went to back in 2018. But I had read good things about Bel Air and was hoping and praying that there would be a bed available for me. They did say that I was medically acceptable, but they did not have a bed. So after 2 days, when they said I was medically able to be moved, I was stable and I could be moved, I said, please give it one more day. They did give it one more day. And at that point, they were able to get me out and get me moved to Bel Air. I went by ambulance. The trip from the city was approximately 2 hours during rush hour. But the best thing about it was the last time I was moved by ambulance to a rehab, they had diesel fuel, and I was so sick by the time I got there that I felt awful. This had no such thing, and it had big windows in the back that I could look out of, and I could see the traffic behind us. And I also had 2 wonderful young men who were the driver and the young man who was with me for the trip. And we talked quite a bit, so it made the trip much more bearable. So I'm going to pretty much stop here, except to tell you that David was there for 5 days. On the morning, Tuesday morning, he had his flight to go back home. I was very sad for me to lose him because I felt totally safe with him there. He was wonderful. And by the way, one of the things that he did for me when I got up to the floor that I was on was he went over to the nurses' station and he said to them, don't treat my mother like her age. She is not an old woman. Just treat her like normal. Talk to her like you would anybody else. He said she knows a lot about medicine. She knows a lot about her own body. And just talk to her like that and you'll do just fine. And my treatment after that, the entire rest of the time I was there, was wonderful. And they did treat me like a human being, not like an old lady. People need to know that you are not the disease that you present with. You are the totality of the person you are, and they need to treat the disease, but they also need to treat the human being. Most of the caretakers that I had were in the right profession and just wonderful. There are a few of them who went above and beyond, and I will always remember them for their extreme kindness, and I hope their futures are just wonderful. So again, as I say, I'm going to leave it there, and we'll pick it up for the next video for the part of it where I was in rehab. So that's my story. The food was decent in the hospital. Some of it was actually pretty good. I took pictures of some of it. I'll show you some of those, and we'll take it from there. So the ongoing story of my latest bout with this thing called cancer and this fight that so many of us have. If any of you have to face this or any other life-altering or daunting challenge, whether it be medical or anything else, give yourself some grace and know that you are stronger than you think you are. And you can do it. You can do it. If anybody has a story they want to share, please do share it down below in the comments. And I'm here to take you on the rest of my journey with me, wherever it takes me. Thanks for being here. You know I love you.